Webb.
What's up? Another episode of the Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Brands, also known as Rick Brands, and a great episode for you today. Today we have one of my favorite guests, and I'm sure one of yours, the amazing journalist, podcaster, writer, Whitney Webb. She's the host of Unlimited Hangout, which is a great podcast, which you can find on Rockfin and her website, unlimitedhangout.com. She also contributes to The Last American Vagabond, which is another one of my favorite websites and shows. I was trying to get this podcast out quickly, but life has been busy. I wish I could do this full time. I really do. I think these conversations with the Ripple Effect Podcast and what we are doing as a community with Union of the Unwanted is super important. I wish I could invest all my time in it, but unfortunately, sometimes I have shows like this that it takes a week before I get around to recording the intro, editing it, and releasing it. So support me if you can. This is a value for value show, and if you can support the show, please do. I have a Patreon page. You can support me there, and if you do, once a month I do a podcast with exclusively my Patreon supporters, and I just did one recently. Super fun. I called Ricky Rants with Fans. I have a PayPal account, and all the stuff will be in the show description. If you want to tip the show, I have a merch store. Check it out, the Ripple Effect Podcast, merch.com. I have hoodies, t-shirts, tank tops, mugs, all types of stuff. So please check that out. And I'm also on Rockfin. I have an exclusive Rockfin show called Ricky Rants on Rockfin. Go on there, check out the free content. And if you enjoy it, then sign up for the premium content and get everybody's premium content. So that's it, guys. Enjoy the podcast, and I will talk to you guys in the next one. Peace. How you feeling?
All right. You know, some days are better than others. But it's all right. Today was a better day than yesterday, so it's all I really could have asked for. So it's fine.
Well, they say no two pregnancies are the same. My wife always says how she's my wife's like, because the first one was awesome. She loved being pregnant. She's like, this is the best thing ever.
Yeah, it was nice the first time compared to this for sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you had a similar experience. The second one now is like completely different, and
it's hell. Yeah, it's been rough. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So she's like, oh, once she had she was pregnant with my daughter. She's like, if I knew it was going to be this, it could be this bad. She's like, I don't know if I'd have a second kid if this was the first.
Yeah. That's pretty much how I would have been too. A lot of people I've talked to have said the second one was worse. Corbett said his wife has the same experience, and like 3 different people here with multiple kids said the same thing. Number 2 is a doozy.
Yeah, maybe they throw you a softball at the first one to make sure you keep
yeah. Keep the birth rate up. Yeah.
But yeah, well, yeah, I know, and then the certain trimesters that are worse than others, and you know, hopefully it gets better. I think my wife, with the very end of it got a little better. I know she just got the big symptom at the end was impatience at the end, because then it's like, well, you get this little thing out of me, like I'm just, you know, I feel like I've been pregnant forever, you know. So I know that happens too.
Well, the first time I was pregnant and I had my daughter, it was like that in the last like month or so. When you get near the end and you like can't sleep lying down and you have to sleep sitting up, that not into that gets tiresome pretty quickly.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. And then I know you did, you know, obviously you did some traveling. You moved to the UK not too long ago, so, and you've had
but I may have to travel again. I don't know if I will get residency or not, so we're hoping, but if I can't, I'll probably go to the US. We'll see.
Yeah, so how does that work? Because my parents actually, they were working in Switzerland when they were pregnant with when my mother was pregnant with us. Well, I'm actually a twin, that's why I'm saying us. And
Yeah.
she was pregnant in Switzerland, and they made her leave. Right, once they found out that she was pregnant, they're like, no, like you can't. Well,
Wow.
apparently she was trying to hide it for a while, and then eventually she's like, they found out, obviously, because you can't avoid it or hide it forever.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
she was sent back to Portugal, where I was born and where my family's from. And but she's like, oh yeah, she's like, you're almost born in Switzerland. They didn't kick me out. So is that a similar situation? Like they can't.
No, no, no. They know, because I had an ultrasound and stuff, but I don't think they're gonna like kick me out over it. It's just like it's hard to stay, hard to get like a non-tourist visa. You can easily get a tourist visa when you come, right? But it's anything that's like you either have to have a work visa or have to apply for like some sort of like spouse or relationship family visa thing. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
I mean, in the climate today, I mean, it would be pretty easy for them to like be like, oh, her political views, we don't like them, so who knows. But they can't really do that to me in the States yet. It's coming, even though I'm a citizen, but
Well, I know
it's a mess.
Chile was getting pretty bad when you left.
Yeah, Chile's fucking nuts even still.
Really?
Yeah.
Have you been keeping up with it since you left?
Yeah. I check mainstream Chilean news pretty often to see when they modify stuff, and I like to look at how their domestic vaccine passport scheme is going, because it's just very indicative of once you get the vaccine just so you can have more freedoms, how like fragile that is, and you've basically given up your freedom once you've allowed them to like move the goalpost that far. Like the Minister of Health of Chile today said that, oh, if you are caught breaking any sort of sanitary norm, that's like what they call like protocols, COVID protocols, I guess, or whatever over there. If you're caught breaking any of those, even if you're double vaccinated, you lose your vaccine passport, which they call the mobility pass over there. And basically, if your town or cities in quarantine in Chile, your mobility pass just means that you're allowed out of your house more than 4 hours a week, which is how it is if you don't have the mobility pass. You're only allowed with police, you have to apply for police permission to do essential shopping, and you can only do that twice a week. And those permissions only last for 2 hours. So the farther you live from town, the more screwed you are, basically, when it comes to that. There is a way to get around it, though, because this court in Chile recently did say that if you falsify the police permission thing, it's not illegal to do that. So you can, in theory, fudge it multiple times, but a lot of people don't have Photoshop skills or the ability to make a convincing one in like rural areas, right? But it is a workaround that has since popped up thanks to a helpful court decision. But I mean, the situation there is really crazy. So anyway, if you get the 2 doses of the vaccine in Chile, you're allowed out of your house. You don't have to have the police permission to do it, but you're going to be asked all the time, like you are if you're out of your house for any reason and quarantined to Chile. You have to show your papers to go into the supermarket, to go to the bank, to get gas, to do anything. And so you have to show your mobility pass to do all of those things, but you can't like go on vacation. You can't even go to the next town with the mobility pass. You can only just be out of your house for more, but you can only just go to essential services, which are the only things that are allowed to open under those circumstances. So it's not really like that much freedom, you know what I mean, in that situation. But some people there, I mean, there's like no resistance in Chile to what's going on. So some people think it's a good thing because it's like a slight relief. I mean, this is just really a different way of applying the shock doctrine, I guess you could say, of the Pinochet era to Chile. It's like used really similar tactics, and people have just really acquiesced to it because the dictatorship in Chile didn't end that long ago. It ended in 1990, and it was really brutal when it was around. with Operation Condor and all of that stuff that happened in Chile. And even before that was a formal thing, when Pinochet first came to power, they made it really clear, like, you don't fuck with us. And and it's been pretty nuts, some of the stuff that's happened in Chile. So last October, for example, there was a group of people that were out after the curfew that was imposed. And the military stopped them, because depending on where you are, the region I was living in, it was like 50-50 chance the checkpoints between towns were going to be military people with giant guns or cops. You didn't really, and in the airport and stuff, they have military people with guns there. In December 2020, it was like full of military guys. But then when I left in March, it was like 2. But they're, still there. It's pretty crazy. But anyway, in this group of people that were out after curfew, these military guys basically kidnapped them, took them to a pine stand, doused them in gasoline, and said they were going to just light them on fire. And they didn't get caught until I think March or April. And then they went to court and they were like, oh, that's naughty. But the military in Chile are some of them are have more power than they've had since the Pinochet era, when the military ran the country. They seem to be enjoying their extreme authority, some of them to a significant degree. And the region I was living in Chile, which is where the largest concentration of Chile's indigenous population is, they've been trying to declare basically a war on domestic terror against the indigenous group, and the main indigenous group in Chile, the Mapuches that live there. And I would argue, based on my experience living there and other things, that the main reason they want to do that is because they want to suspend the Constitution, which this domestic terror thing they want to do in this region involves suspending the Constitution and basically declaring martial law. If they do that, then they're able to get around the indigenous land law, which basically prevents Mapuches from selling Mapuche land to non-Mapuches. So even if someone who's a Mapuche wants to sell a land to a mining corporation or something like that, or a private developer or whatever, they're not allowed to unless that person's a Mapuche, right? They can't sell it to a business or anything like that. So it's I think that's why they want to do it, because in one town I was living in that had a very high Mapuche concentration, they discovered gold, and the mayor was trying to do all these shady deals to get that land that was in Mapuche hands passed to someone else, who would then allow it to be developed into a mine, and ran into issues there. And of course, mining is one of the main, the main sector of the Chilean economy. If it's not the top one, it's the second one. I think it is the top one though, because they are I think the biggest exporter of copper in the world. They have 20% of the world's lithium and a ton of stuff, but most of that's in the north of the country. So a lot of those big mines are running out, because mines are finite. And they've been exploiting it and exploiting that area of Chile for 200 years excessively with mines. Well, arguably longer with the Spanish there in the north of Chile. So yeah, they have looked elsewhere, because the Andes are full of minerals all the way down. So, they're looking into a new territory, and this is the unexploited part of the Andes of Chile, because it's been in indigenous hands for so long. Because even when the Spanish were, the colonial power in South America, the Mapuches were the only indigenous group they encountered that they were like, we're going to leave you alone, you are scary, bye, and basically allowed them to have their own kingdom. And they were a sovereign nation recognized by the Spanish. And when the Chilean state was established, they're like, oh yeah, we'll recognize your sovereignty, haha. And then they came in with cannons and automatic weapons, basically. Well, those of the late 19th century, they're equivalent, sort of Last Samurai style type stuff, and just killed a bunch of civilians. They call it the pacification of the Araucanía, which is the name of that Mapuche dominant region where I was living. So yeah, there's a lot of things going on there. So maybe there's more military in that region under the guise of COVID than there are in some other parts of the country. I've heard, for example, in Santiago, the capital, they don't really have as many soldiers on the ground there as they had in the region I was living in. But yeah, it's pretty pretty intense what's going on over there. But I think through all of the Andes, there are major efforts to clamp down and secure the mining resources there and also in Africa. I think a lot of the motivation behind some of these random deaths of African leaders, including in Tanzania, in Africa, and a lot of the election unrest or meddling that has taken place in places like Ecuador recently, and most recently in Peru. That's all aimed at securing those mining resources for the whole fourth industrial revolution, the move into smart cities and electric vehicles and all of that stuff. Because we know, for example, in Bolivia, that coup that was backed by the US that happened like right after the Bolivian government was going to go in with like a joint deal to develop Bolivia's part of the lithium triangle, which is Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. They were going to jointly develop it with a Chinese company. And so the US is like in this proxy war for resources with the Chinese about who's going to be the dominant power in the fourth industrial revolution of AI and smart technologies and all of this stuff. And China has a huge advantage because they have like a majority of the world's rare earth minerals in mainland China itself. So the US has to go around and grab all these other pieces. In all these other countries. And then, Morales gets overthrown in Bolivia. And then we know now that the coup government in Bolivia was negotiating with the US and basically offered that same lithium mine area to Elon Musk and companies that were partnered with him, right? So we know that's been happening. Ecuador has a lot of mines on the Andes. Chile has an election coming up that is favoring the center left and leftist candidates right now. The right is having a really hard time holding on to it because the current president is right wing, supposedly, though a lot of people on the right in Chile think he's like a globalist shill for China or something like that. Even though he's technically like a right-wing candidate. So his whole party is like in ruins, basically, and not very popular. So there'll probably be some meddling there to keep it from getting, too many deals being made with China. Because like Tanzania, for example, they nationalized their mining sector. This is before the COVID stuff. Their president that died recently under very suspicious circumstances before he was controversial for the COVID stance. He was all about kicking out like the Gates Foundation and Monsanto in GMO food trials. And then he went after the oil industry, and then he went after the mining industry. And Tanzania sits on all these nickel reserves and graphite reserves that are like essential minerals for the whole fourth industrial revolution. So I think that was probably a factor there because, the people that had it before, massive companies like Glencore and Barrick Gold lost all their money in that company. It was in that mine. It was seized from them. It's like the world's largest nickel mine, and it was a joint effort between a separate group and the Tanzanian government. And so it's like a month after that is when that guy disappeared. So I think that's a factor going on here too, because they don't want these falling into Chinese hands, right? Because otherwise they'll be able to develop all of the stuff and the US won't. And there's like this AI arms race going on. But I would argue that, minerals are the new oil in terms of proxy wars between China and, between the US and the other superpowers like Russia and China and stuff. So it's not like the Middle East anymore as much, where it was about, oil, war for oil and all this stuff. Now it's like war for minerals, or coups for minerals.
And some of what you're talking about, you look at the history in Iran and nationalizing the oil fields there, what that led to. So when other countries are doing similar things, when they're not playing ball with international corporations or other governments that want to take advantage of the resources, mysterious things will happen. I know there's been a lot of conversations with what happened in Haiti recently, and obviously Brazil. A lot of people are talking about Brazil being a mess, and like, oh, it's because of all the corruption, and but it always boggles my mind how Latin America, I mean, throughout history, we've been involved in their elections. We've been involved with their politics.
Yeah, we coup them all the time, and we meddle there all the time. Totally.
Yeah.
And you know, it's been going on really obviously in recent years, but it's been going on for a really long time, really long time. But like what happened in Ecuador recently, right? They made sure that this Guillermo Lasso, right-wing candidate, got in, because the other guy that was running was basically, you know, for Rafael Correa's party, that style of like Ecuadorian leftist. And when Correa was in power, he basically gave a bunch of the mining deals in Ecuador to Chinese companies, to piss off the US, you could argue. So they probably thought that they, you know, his, you know, this candidate that he was supporting and backing, would do the same. And so there was like really shady election meddling there, I would argue. But that candidate didn't challenge it, I guess, because he didn't want to go through that when he knows the US was trying to keep him out of office anyway. And what's going on in Peru right now, which has their biggest export, I know for a fact, is minerals in Peru, followed by oil and gas. The guy that won the election, Pedro Castillo, who's a leftist candidate, is basically already said that he's going to raise taxes on mines. And the person he was running against, Keiko Fujimori, who's from like the Fujimori political dynasty of Peru, who her father was president all during the 1990s in Peru, super corrupt guy. But basically he didn't make mining companies pay taxes. They were able to do all this stuff just to attract the capital of the mining companies. And under him, very little, if any, of that money trickled down to regular Peruvians, right? So, you know, she's like the pro-business candidate. So yeah, they still won't certify that election, even though it happened like a month ago. And things there are getting really tense. There's people, ex-military people, saying that if they certify the election for Castillo, even though he did win, that there's that there should be a coup against him and all of this stuff. So Peru could definitely get really dicey. I mean, I think we'll probably see some election meddling. The next country that has minerals that's up to have an election is Zambia in Africa, and their left-leaning candidate has said that he'll nationalize the mines, like the Tanzanian president that just died did as well. So that probably won't go well, because they've already, you know, the corporations, the elite, the governments, I mean, it's come across, they say it everywhere that we're now like moving into the post-oil economy. Data is the new oil, and so. So like all these wars for oil or coups for oil in the past, like you mentioned, how Iran was, they overthrew that in, I think, like what, 1954, because they Mossadegh nationalized the oil company, or the main oil company there. So like now it's all about minerals because it's a post-oil economy, or that's what they're trying to move into, and that's what they're planning for. Who's going to be the dominant power in the post-oil economy? So it's not about who has control over the flow of hydrocarbons or hydrocarbon resources anymore. It's about who has control over the flow of minerals and the mineral resources. And, you know, I think that could be why maybe there's so much unrest in South Africa right now. I'm not a huge expert in what's going on there, but South Africa is one of, if not the top, company for mining, or not company, sorry, country for mining in all of Africa. So, you know, if we're talking about this on the bigger picture, it's interesting to see so much unrest develop there in recent days. Really, it's just been like a week of that, I guess. But it's some of the pictures out of there look really nuts, and they're, you know, they have like, I think they're gonna they just announced today they're gonna put like 25,000 more troops on the ground in their own country to try and keep things clamped down. Don't know.
Well, you figure, just like any business, you're thinking long term. So all these countries and corporations that were making their riches from oil and that natural resource, they obviously knew that with the push of electric cars and all these other things, that there was, basically you could only milk that cow for so long. You have to look long term, like what's the next thing that we can kind of profit from and control. So that's why you start, like you said, you can kind of see the trend, and in many cases they're pushing the trend in that direction because you know it benefits them. And so yeah, without a doubt, that's why when people talk about the Green New Deal and all these things and global warming, regardless what people think about the science or whatever, the intentions aren't pure. You know, there's
Oh, totally not. I totally agree with that. Yeah, well, the rhetoric about the Green New Deal leaves out so much stuff that moving to the post-oil economy implies, as it is being currently designed and set up by a lot of the same people promoting the Green New Deal. So obviously this growth of exploitative mining is going to explode. They're even talking about like doing deep sea mining in the ocean, which is obviously going to, I mean, the ocean is already in a horrible state from like just mass pollution and things like Fukushima and all this stuff that has been going on for a really long time. So, I mean, do we really think that like deep sea mineral extraction is going to make that better? I mean, if you look at the environmental toll of mining, it's just totally insane. I remember because when I was living in this town in Chile, I mentioned earlier, and they were going to put in a gold mine in the local paper, the mayor intervened and kept it from being published in the local paper. But I wrote about the environmental impacts of mining because that town that I was living in depended a lot on tourism because there's a national park right next to it. So I was like, kiss your national park and tourism goodbye if you put a gold mine in here because it pollutes the water, it pollutes the air, it pollutes the soil for miles around it. I mean, it's very destructive. And a lot of this is going in the developing world, you know, like a lot of these minerals are found in places like Africa and South America. So it's not going to be pretty. But also there's some in the US, like I think Nevada has a decent amount of like rare earth minerals. They're talking about mining projects out there and stuff. But like I said earlier, China has like a huge advantage. And obviously the US is aware of that and is like, well, if China has that much, we have to get all of the other ones. Basically, to keep them out of Chinese hands or whatever. So, you know, it's a total mess. But even beyond like the mineral side, the Green New Deal doesn't talk about, for example, the US military, biggest consumer of fossil fuels, world's largest polluter. The military is responsible for nearly the vast majority of the Superfund sites in the US. If you don't know what a Superfund site is, they're like sites designated by the EPA as being excessively toxic. And basically you're like, can't develop or live in them or even live near them in some cases. Because they're just so just insanely toxic. There's different grades of them where they go in and they clean it up a little bit and then they downgrade it from like super severe, super fun to another one. But almost all of those are, former military sites or former military bases in the continental US. And, even beyond that, like in Washington state alone, they have one Superfund site that used to be a nuclear test site that just leaks hazardous nuclear waste out like all the time. It begins with an H. I forget the exact name. I can't remember it because it's been a couple of years since I wrote about it. But even beyond that, the military for the past several years, I think since 2014, has been dumping literally tons of toxic metals, including like mercury and all of this stuff into the Puget Sound, which is like close to Seattle. They do it every year. It's insane. And they're not included in the Green New Deal at all, which is pretty ludicrous. And I think I think that in and of itself is proof that the Green New Deal as developed by leaving out the military means like what other organizations or corporations will be lucky enough to be exempt from the Green New Deal. If you're going to have something as environmentally destructive as the US military be entirely exempt from it, and not included, then what stops, other elite favored institutions from also being exempt? It's like another example of, the underclass, the regular people have to restrict their lifestyles and all of this stuff, but the elite or certain institutions that favor them, like the military, which pillages other countries for their resources, or if used in lawful enforcement directly, protects their interests, maintains the status quo, and all of that stuff. If posse comitatus is ever eliminated, which it very well could be soon, we'll see.
a lot of these regulations, they, like you said, they end up hurting the average person. In
Yeah,
Massachusetts, some years ago, there was a push from so if you're doing construction for Mass DOT projects, they wanted you to put all the equipment that was on the project had to have like these special mufflers that clean the, put out cleaner air, that put out cleaner
yeah,
exhaust smoke. And it was super expensive. I forgot what it was made out of, but it was some really expensive metal, and it would clean out the air. And all smaller contractors were like, spending a lot of money so they could bid and do Mass DOT jobs. And of course, like, if you're a big million dollar corporation, not a huge hit on you. If you're a small little mom and pop business, now it's like that's a
yeah.
huge expense.
But
And it
yeah, well, sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, and it was ridiculous because you're driving there with your, your work truck that's diesel. You have planes flying over. Like, it didn't do anything. All you did was make people put like this expensive exhaust on like some little, John Deere backhoe or some Bobcat. And what was it really doing besides just costing, a small business money and profits, basically?
Yeah, well, I think COVID-19 has sort of been a segue up to that getting even more severe on a federal level. So for example, with like COVID-19 protocols, people had to buy like temperature monitors, or at least in Chile, I don't know, I wasn't in the US when all of this stuff, was happening, but the small Chilean businesses, a lot of them just like couldn't function because they couldn't afford some of the stuff that was required by the government to install in order to be allowed to continue to operate, or they couldn't hire an extra person to like do all this cleaning that became required as part of these protocols and all of this stuff. But easily that's much it's much easier for bigger corporations to weather the storm. And then of course massive corporations benefit much more when all the businesses are forced to shut down because they have, savings, they have assets that small businesses don't have, and they can, last in that type of situation much longer while their competition goes under. And of course, bigger companies oftentimes have online stores that small businesses, especially local businesses, don't necessarily have. That's why Amazon has just gotten so even bigger and more of a monopoly while this has been going on. And regarding your example with the muffler, I don't know if you remember, it was like a month or two ago, they like this commercial started going around where they were like talking about this seal, the safety seal, to show that like a building had implemented all this COVID stuff and now it's safe. And I think they had like Jennifer Lopez in this commercial and some of these big people being like, you should only go in buildings with the safety seal and all of this stuff. And you go to the people's website and you have to pay like minimum 13 grand to get the seal, like the sticker on the outside of your building. Yeah, so that's just like another example of that. And they'll be doing the same thing for climate change.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I would agree. A lot of the policies are that. And like, if you look at, for example, the Green New Deal as it was originally written when like AOC first came on the scene and stuff, her whole thing, one of the main thing there was carbon markets and the Federal Reserve making a new lending facility and like all of this stuff. And like, really, the progressives think that the Federal Reserve, the privately owned Federal Reserve owned by the Wall Street banks, is going to rescue us from this, and that carbon markets are the solution to an environmental problem. I don't know. Big oil companies, and this is like in very pro mainstream progressive pro Green New Deal outlets like The Intercept, big oil companies love carbon markets. They're like, this rules, because they can, it's a market. They can rig it, they can manipulate it, just like the stock market or any of this stuff. So we're going to make a stock market for carbon essentially, and that's going to solve all these problems. It's just gonna be another massive wealth transfer in a way for these financial behemoths like BlackRock and stuff to like get even more richer and control everything, because the whole you'll own nothing and be happy mantra of these groups that like back a lot of this climate change orthodoxy, and that the things we've been talking about are the solutions. And and all of this stuff. I forgot what I was going to say. Sorry.
It's all right.
I was going to make an important point. Oh yeah, sorry. So basically that mantra, what it means is that you, the underclass, will own nothing, but like BlackRock and all these other companies, they're going to be the landlords. They're going to own everything. Bill Gates is the biggest owner of farmland in the US. So he's owning the farmland while farmers are being forced to sell because of all these different conditions and a lack of relief during COVID, among other things that have gone on, and longstanding problems in the agricultural sector. And this move to sort of like a post livestock economy and stuff, obviously going to impact smaller farmers. BlackRock and Blackstone Capital now are the biggest landlords in the US. So you'll be renting your house forever, but someone's going to own it. It's not like all the stuff that will be used in this 2030 utopia where you own nothing and you'll be happy. I mean, someone's going to own it and someone's going to lease it to you. They leave that part out. Interesting.
Yeah, when they say you'll own nothing, it doesn't mean they won't own anything. It just means you'll own nothing. Yeah.
Yeah.
The problem with a lot of these ideas, and I think some like true believers, some people who honestly think, oh, these are good ideas to implement. I think even if you could make an argument for like, okay, universal basic income, or, as a alternative to like welfare, because I can see that argument being made, the idea that basically welfare gives you an incentive to not work, where if you had a universal basic income, you would remove that incentive. And so you can make like little arguments and you could talk about these little specific issues. But what I think people sometimes have a hard time seeing is that even if there are some moral people who are pushing these ideas, the people who have eventually implement them and control the system aren't moral people, and they're going to expose it and use those things for their benefit, not for our benefit. So
Right.
a lot of times it's like, you see these people who like they truly believe in global climate change or global warming, and it's like, yeah, your heart might be in the right place, you might truly care about the environment, but the things that they're selling you to try to make the world a better place,
are made by people who don't.
exactly.
Yeah. No, that's definitely true. And I think a lot of the propaganda pitches for those solutions that are being offered to us by the elite and corporations and all the stuff that have caused environmental catastrophe, their main selling point is like this collectivism thing, sort of like COVID. We're all in this together. That's what they tell you. But, as COVID has shown, a lot of the elite, political elite or economic elite, whatever, they don't follow the rules that everyone's supposed to follow. Just in the UK, you have like Neil Ferguson and Matt Hancock, the main architects of the whole lockdown. One being the modeler of the disease that had his model was totally wrong and predicted all this doomsday stuff. And Matt Hancock was the health secretary of the UK at the time, only having resigned relatively recently. They both got caught breaking rules in a very egregious way. And if it was really, as scary and awful with all the fear porn that they were feeding the public, they obviously did not believe that themselves. And there's numerous cases of this happening in almost every country. Chile has numerous examples. The US has numerous examples. Ireland, those are the ones I just remember, but I'm sure it's happened everywhere. And climate change is going to be essentially the same too. A lot of these billionaires like Bill Gates, right, who's made the pivot from COVID fear mongering to climate change fear mongering. I mean, he uses his private jet to fly everywhere. and so do most of these guys. I mean, they plan to keep their multiple houses while you're forced to rent from BlackRock and like live in a studio apartment with your family. And so, it's just like ridiculous. So it's obviously, what we've seen under COVID-19 is like an unprecedented wealth transfer take place, even bigger than 2008. And that's just going to get worse. And this line between the haves and the have-nots is just going to get, wider than ever, and just be ridiculous. But they can only really get away with this by selling it as, this is a lot of their policies is like progressive progressive and this is progress and all this stuff. And they're mainly trying to appeal to the left and to the youth. Specifically, I think that's why they've chosen, Greta Thunberg as their climate change spokesperson. And a lot of the people promoting the Green New Deal and this stuff tend to be progressive politicians that have more appeal to the youth of today than other segments of society. So I think there's a definite focus there, specifically on the progressive left and the youth, to get them to think that this is for the benefit of everyone, using sort of like Star Trek logic of, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And then actually, they're trying to create a system that it completely benefits the elite in a way that is even more exploitative than the system we currently have. So I think that definitely really needs to be exposed. And unfortunately, if you say these things, a lot of progressive shows, even in independent media, won't have you on. So
I know, I know it's but you have a pretty, a huge following on social media, on Twitter, and I love seeing the growth of somebody like yourself who's been doing amazing work for such a long time.
Well, thanks.
I've been talking to somebody. I was interviewed on a show not too long ago, and we're talking about your work and how much the host loves what you've been doing. I'm like, she got a lot of popularity around the Epstein stuff, but before that, she was around already doing articles.
I was.
And I guess it's not a bad thing that a specific story really caught people's attention. But it's also one of those things where, like, obviously the bigger you are, the more critiquing people are going to do. Like, being a journalist, like, the thing with me is, like, I'm an idiot. I always say I'm an idiot. I'm like, I just put out in the line. I'm hopefully a conduit to interesting people who do great work. I
think you do great work, Ricky. Don't be so hard on yourself.
But I'm also just covering my ass in case I do say something stupid or get something wrong. Hey, he's an idiot. You can't take.
Hey, but we're all human, though. The important thing is to just have integrity and be honest about it and own up when you make a mistake.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the bigger the bigger you get, the more of a target you're gonna have. I get people all the time, writing in comments or whatever. I usually don't read any of that shit, so I don't know how. Usually I don't read it. Every once in a while I feel bad because I'm like, there's probably somebody there who's writing something really nice, and it'd be nice if they got some acknowledgement. So I'll read it. But when you get to a certain size, like a James Corbett, yourself, and you get so many people, of course we're going to get things wrong. And that's why I think the human aspect of people is really important. I just had Robert Malone, Dr. Robert Malone, actually,
yeah,
Ryan had him on recently too, and a great guy. We had a long talk, and we got into who he is as a person. I had a lot of people tell me, like, oh, it was so nice to see that aspect of him and get to know him as a person and his character. And that's something I try to, that's why I like having these casual conversations, because I think when people get things wrong, but they're a good person, you got to see that side of them. You kind of get a feel of, like, okay, they're a good person. If by any chance they got something wrong, it wasn't because they have some hidden agenda, or they're, it's not motivated by any not so moral reasons. They just got it wrong. People make mistakes, like you said, and sometimes it's not even a mistake. Sometimes it's just a different perspective or opinion on something that happened or event. I think a lot of times people, because they have a different perspective on something, they're like, no, they're wrong. They're, and it's like, well, are they wrong, or is it just a different opinion on the same thing? So, but yeah, I think seeing that human aspect of people is important. The thing about you is you have done a lot of interviews, and I think one of the reasons why I like you, and I think a lot of people really like you, isn't just your information, but you're a sincere person. I know you did that. I listened to it, I think most of it, when you did that interview with Ryan about some personal stuff that you were going.
Yeah. I didn't really want to have to do it, but it ended up involving a person who has a lot of or a lot of her audience overlaps with mine and stuff, and it did get really messy, and definitely not the thing I wanted to really air out publicly, because I really don't really talk about my personal life very much. And last year, like it was for a lot of people, was really hard, and I got duped pretty badly, and it sucked, and I got screwed over big time. And then he, the person that did that to me, moved on to this other person doing similar research and, you know, is at it again. And I was hoping I could, you know, expose that, so this person could see who this guy is. And that hasn't really gone anywhere, but, you know, the info is out there, but I don't exactly like, you know, airing out my, it's not even just my personal life. In that case, it's like a personal, very embarrassing mistake.
Yeah, but
You
we're all
know,
human. I think that's, you know, so it was funny because what got my attention about that was the fact that you don't ever really get too personal in your life. I think you do
no,
interviews and some of your character comes out. You can tell you're a sincere person and you're a very pleasant person, respectful, and I think, you know, that's nice to see that aspect of it. When you to get that personal, you know, I'm sure it was super difficult. I mean, even initially watching the beginning of it, I'm like, what is this about? And then I'm like, I could see how uncomfortable the whole conversation was for everybody. And
yeah, it's not a thing I like to talk about either, but I think
oh, sorry. So,
my dedicated trolls, you know, I have a couple um, out there. They like to capitalize off of the fact that I don't talk about my personal life to just make up shit about it.
yeah.
That's not true. Like there's this YouTuber apparently named Brendan O'Connell who constantly talks about how I actually live in Florida and I've never lived in Chile. I never lived in Chile and I'm not in the UK right now and all of this stuff. He also claims I don't ever talk about Bill Gates. I've never covered Israel's intelligence unit 8200, despite the fact in the past like 2 years alone, I've written over 12 articles on them, and that I don't talk about the Talpiot program, which I literally covered in my last article for TLAV. You know, just makes up stuff, and then I have like all of his. Tells all his viewers to go after my stuff, and they leave all these comments about how I'm a shill and whatever.
Have you gotten good at ignore? It's funny because I've had people on the show. They're like, once you're called a shill, it means you made it. You know, it means that. And
Yeah, I mean, it happens to everyone, and you know, once you get to a certain level of following, and they know that you're not the type of person that can be bought. I mean, they send people to say this stuff because what they want to do by saying that is try and keep people away from your content and like let people make up their own mind about your integrity as a podcaster, a YouTuber, a writer, whatever, by looking at the consistency of your work and what you stand for, you know, over time, and let people make their own conclusions. But if it's just all these comments like shill, ignore them, don't look at what they're saying and all this stuff, I mean, who does that help? Really, it should just be about people making their own decisions and coming to their own conclusions about people and information, and telling people not to look at someone's work is usually a red flag to me.
yeah, and so I hope that you don't read most of that shit, that, you know, because you do have a huge following. If 1 out of a million people is a shithead and you have
Yeah, I used to read it a lot more, you know, and sometimes you see that stuff and yeah, I don't fall into this trap anymore, but I used to. You know, you think they're like a real person or like they're saying that, and not from a place of bad faith or whatever, but more often than not, I mean, it's hard to know. I mean, we know that there's like all these bot farms on social media that, like, you know, the military intelligence agencies of the US, the UK, and Israel, just to name a few, weaponize social media and have bot farms and have accounts that they use to put out disinformation or say all this stuff, or target or attack people they don't like. So it's like really hard to know if those comments are that or like an actual person, or maybe it's just like an actual person, but they're like just super bitter and say that to everyone. I mean, you know, it's like really hard to know. You can't get hung up on it. You know, you just kind of have to do you and focus on the content at the end of the day. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, you've done enough interviews, and people have enough of a sample size of who you are as a person for them to come up with their own conclusions. If somebody's not reading somebody's work just because some shithead on Twitter said something or some other journalist said something, then, you know, then you're an idiot anyways. I mean, you shouldn't just take somebody's word for it. It's like, let me look into it. Even when somebody discredits somebody and they're like, oh, his work sucks, I'm like, oh, let me look into it and decide for myself. You know, let me see who they are. And because you never know what personal, you know, issue they might have or whatnot. So anytime I see people, and I see it sometimes with a lot of people in the alternative media community, they will get in these arguments on Twitter. They will get in these arguments on YouTube in the comments. And I'm like, why are you wasting your time? Like, the people who know you love you, and the people who actually have a sense of who you are, they love you and they like you. So, like, who cares about some shithead behind a keyboard who like you said, he might have some personal internal issues that he's taken out on you, or he, like you said, it could even go as deep as he's hired
There's no way to know,
exactly.
right?
So
There's
don't.
no way to know. Hmm.
Yeah, so it's really important. It's it sucks that they're that it's even an issue, these type of things, that people are out there discrediting. But I think the closer you get to the truth, the closer you get to some real information, that's what's going to happen, and
Yeah, it's inevitable in that way.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, without a doubt. Now you have a new article that I know you recently talked to James about, and it's on, I believe, Unlimited Hangout, A Leap Towards Humanity's Destruction. This one thing I love about all your research is you prove how connected everything is. Like, there's so many times you're like,
Yeah.
you're rattling things off, and you're like, and then this guy's connected to DARPA, and this guy's connected to that corporation, this guy's connected, and I'm like, holy crap! Like, when there's that many dots, I mean, of course, like, things start making sense. You start connecting them. Do you want to get into that article a little bit?
Yeah, sure. But I will say one of the reasons I try and make all those connections and interconnectedness as explicit as possible is because when you're writing about these people, specifically intelligence agencies, people like to accuse me of just smearing everyone by guilt by association. Critics of my work will say that, but when you read the article in good faith with an
Well, let
open
me
mind, it's
defend
pretty
you, because
clear.
I heard a podcast that I'm a fan of say something like that, and it pissed me off. And I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. We don't have to bring it up if you don't want to, but
Oh, yeah, it was about the Edge Foundation, right? About my Bill Gates, Jeffrey Epstein stuff.
I can't remember what specifically they were critiquing because I was too pissed that they were critiquing you. but but I remember, and I'm sure I'm sure I'm not the first one who probably brought up, or maybe you even listened to the show yourself. But it's that type of stuff drives me nuts, because it's like one person's opinion, like you said, could have the effect that you said before, where you end up scaring people from actually looking into your work and pushing them away.
Yeah, if this is the one I'm thinking about, it was definitely that. And there's two co-hosts, yes, and one of them just let the other guy say it, and the other guy was mad because he had associations with the Edge Foundation and personally knew the people and didn't like what I was saying about them, even though there is plenty of evidence to back up the fact that the forces behind the Edge Foundation were very shady, and that it was basically a front for Epstein, who was providing all of its funding for more than a decade and using it as an influence operation. Does that mean absolutely everyone that was in Edge was part of it? No, but the people that I mentioned that were part of Edge in the article and in that interview that they were playing a recording from weren't just part of the Edge Foundation. They also had meetings and associations with Epstein directly, either going on trips with him or praising him or telling people to work with him and all of this stuff. So, it wasn't a guilt by association thing. He was casting it as such. And obviously, because he's friends with these people, as he said himself, he's personally invested in the situation and smearing me to protect, his own bias, essentially. So I think a lot of people, I did get a lot of emails after that, and it was people who had not heard of my work, but thought the guy was really disingenuous about it, and then started following me. So I guess it backfired to an extent, but it's hard to know,
Yeah, well, the other co-host sounded like he was a fan of your work. I know he's mentioned it before on the show, and it did seem like a unusual, because it's like, even if I disagree with a journalist on one thing, I wouldn't go to that extent to kind of scare people off from their work, so it did seem very unlike him, and kind of weird and unusual. And even the other co-host seemed like he was a little taken off by it, like he was kind of surprised by the way he was handling it. But yeah, I mean, I guess
but they can't go after my facts, you know what I mean? Like, if they were to they can't be like, she's wrong about this, right? They can just smear.
Well, when I listen to that, I put myself in your shoes, and I'm like, okay, these guys are kind of in the world that we're in regards to alternative media, and we're, I guess alternative media is the term I'm going to use, because we're not the mainstream media, we're the alternative media. But and I'm like, how would I feel if some shithead like that, discredited what I did, or spoke about me in that manner when they didn't even know who I am personally, and they're kind of shaming my work or whatever. And I felt bad, and I felt bad, because I'm like, dude, that's kind of a shitty move in their part, and it sucks, because I'm sure there's crossover in regards to all of our work. There's crossover, because these are usually people who listen to these type of shows or follow your work. They're people who are curious, who are really looking, they're truth seekers, they're really explore, they have questions, and they're looking for answers. And so it really pissed me off, and I remember thinking to myself, I hope she's not upset, and I hope she doesn't take it personally, because I'm again, this goes back to like what we said. I'm like, you just got to do what you love, do what you're passionate about, and know that people who know you, and people who are actually familiar with your work and who you are as a person, they like you, and they
Yeah.
work. I mean, we joke around all the time about how you're the female version of James Corbett in regards to like gold standard of journalism.
Oh, thanks. I think he's the gold standard, so that's like cool for me. I have arrived.
So
That's neat. Yeah. Well, I know that, like, I'm not exactly friendly to the powers that be. And I know that on Twitter, I have a lot of big names that follow me. I have like one of the top managers of Peter Thiel's Wealth, who recently announced that he's running for a congressional seat. He has been following me for a while. Jack Dorsey, the head of Twitter, follows me. DARPA follows me on Twitter. Yeah, one time they tweeted at me because they were like, "You didn't seek us for comment," and like, I was like, "But dude, like you're DARPA."
Yeah, like I'm just gonna ask for like internal personal information about you, what your actually intentions are, and you're just gonna give me that information.
Well, when I've written about DARPA, I say I'll take things like the official description they have on their website to talk about the program. So why do I need to ask them for comment when I'm already using their official statement on it? I just, after that, I'll be like, well, in this case, here are examples of DARPA not only using this research for its official purpose, but also weaponizing it and trying to make it a weapon and stuff. Like in the case of some of their research into genetic augmentation for soldiers, where they're like, we'll make soldiers better able to resist disease and not need as much sleep and not need as much food and whatever. And they try and sell it that way. The program manager of that same thing in this article in Wired was like, and we also use that same technology to make genetic weapons to use against our enemies. And it's like, yeah, because they're the military. So yeah, DARPA as an organization is the military's research agency, and they're interested in making things that are useful to the military. So, they have like a whole office, the biological technologies office, and almost everything there they justify as a healthcare thing. We're going to improve healthcare for veterans and the general public by doing all of this stuff, but they also plan to use all that stuff. That the military is not focused on giving people like free, better healthcare for everyone around the world. Okay, it's the U.S. military. Look at their track record. Look at the things they've done, like make Lyme disease, among other things. Right. So like these are people that look at all of this stuff is like, how can this technology be of use to the U.S. military for the purposes that we say, but also purposes we don't necessarily say. So I'm not going to take DARPA's word for it, because, if they would comment and be like, of course we wouldn't do anything bad with brain machine interfaces, which they drive the research of that whole industry, by the way. DARPA does. This is like admitted because they pour so much money into it. We'd never use that for bad. It's just for people that can't, so they can have robotic limbs and walk again. We'd never use it to like weaponize that against people and read their thoughts and, do things like that. We'd never use it for mass surveillance, even though we had that total information awareness program back after 9/11, that was, and all this stuff. Like, it's just very disingenuous. And anytime you ask the military for comment about things they do that are naughty, just like the CIA, they're like, no comment, or they're like, no, we didn't. Even if it's like documented, like in the case of the CIA, or if it's really an egregious crime, they'll be like, well, we will investigate ourselves. And then we all know how that ends, right? So anyway, it's relevant. We're talking about DARPA, I guess, to this article that you wanted to talk about. Sorry for getting off on a tangent there. So where would you like me to start? The programs themselves, the organization itself, or the people behind it? Because it's a pretty long article.
What do you think is the most crucial, important aspect of it?
They're all pretty crucial, but I can basically summarize some like the people behind it. So basically, this article, it's called "A Leap Towards Humanity's Destruction" because it's about a group called Welcome Leap, which is the new global health DARPA. Or ARPA, they say, Advanced Research Project Agency, a DARPA, an organization modeled after DARPA. Yeah, that's focusing on health on a global scale. That's funded and essentially run to a certain extent by an organization called the Wellcome Trust, which there's a couple different ways to summarize that for like a US audience, because it's a UK based organization. But I guess for all, the easiest way to summarize it in one sentence is like to compare it to, in terms of influence and research interest, to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation of the UK. The Wellcome Trust was set up out of the will of Henry Wellcome, whose company Burroughs Wellcome is today known as GlaxoSmithKline, one of the biggest pharmaceutical giants. He expressly set up this charity so that it has two aspects called the Wellcome Trust and the Wellcome Foundations, which are essentially set up in his will, for all intents the same organization, but the foundations are for-profit companies and the trust is a charity that the foundations essentially use as a front. So it's basically this model of philanthropy that's really a business disguising itself as a philanthropic organization. The Gates Foundation and the Clinton Foundation and some other philanthropic foundations set up around that same time in the early 2000s. We're part of an intentional pivot to normalize that model of philanthropy, specifically in the US. That's why a lot of them talk about, like Bill Gates, when he talks about philanthropy, often talks about investments, return on investments, and things like that. And since his foundation was created, his net worth has gotten massive. Like, he was already like one of the world's richest men, and now his net worth has just exploded since then. And he talks about how vaccines are a great way to make money. And before the COVID thing, he was one of the main evangelists for GMOs and Monsanto agriculture and all of this stuff. It's not because they care about global health. But anyway, the Wellcome Trust today is the largest private medical research charity in the United Kingdom. They have unfortunate ties to what was previously, until 1989, known as the British Eugenics Society, today known as the Galton Institute. Yes, they cared so much about getting away from eugenics that they renamed it in 1989 after the person who created eugenics, Sir Francis Galton. So it tells you a lot. And the Wellcome Trust hosts the historical archives of the Eugenics Society when it was openly racist, and saying, keep Black people from reproducing, pretty openly, actually explicitly say that in their writings from the 50s and 60s.
Well, they denied it for a long time, but even Margaret Sanger, they finally started taking her name off stuff, and they denied that she was racist or whatever for a long time.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons they did that is because there was a very well-respected Harvard researcher who wrote a book called Medical Apartheid that basically said that Margaret Sanger's the Negro Project, it was called, was explicitly about reducing the population rate of the African-American population in the US. So yeah, so she was part of the Eugenics Society in the US, the sister organization that worked directly with the British Eugenics Society. And on the British side, it's a very elite institution, like Winston Churchill was a member, for example. Julian Huxley was the former president, the first director general of UNESCO, brother of Aldous Huxley. You know, the Huxleys were a very aristocratic British family. So, you know, this is definitely sort of like the upper levels of British society being involved with this for a very long time. The Wellcome Trust reflects that a lot. UK newspapers from the 90s were talking about how the Wellcome Trust is so influential over what medical research gets pursued and what doesn't. That the decisions they make have shaped the future of the human race. Right. And they focus predominantly on things like, you know, gene editing, now have moved into nanotechnology and a lot of this transhumanist medicine and things like that. And of course, you see that reflected in what Wellcome Leap focuses on as an organization. And one of the main indicators that that was going to be their focus before they announced any of their programs, they have 4 programs currently, is who they hired to be the CEO, the chief executive officer, and the chief operating officer of this organization, both of whom are former DARPA directors. One was the director of DARPA and one was the deputy director of DARPA during the Obama administration from like 2009 to 2012, at which point they were both poached by Google and recruited by Google to create Google's private sector DARPA equivalent, which is called ATAP. The Advanced Technology and Products Group, I think is what it stands for. And over there, these two people, Regina Dugan is CEO of Wellcome Leap and the former director of DARPA, and her deputy at DARPA, Google, and now Wellcome Leap is this guy named Ken Gabriel. Who they both have histories at DARPA going back to the 1990s, and their various controversies for different reasons. If you want to know more about that, you can read the article in the interest of time. But the thing to know about Regina Dugan is that she's the person who greenlighted DARPA's investments in the mRNA vaccines that are now the COVID mRNA vaccines of today. If it wasn't for her, it's very possible that that Pfizer and Moderna's mRNA vaccine would not exist. That's being currently used right now, because those early investments in those programs, specifically in Moderna's from DARPA, came in 2013 and helped put Moderna specifically on the map and made it the most highly valued biotech company for over a decade before, or almost a decade before it had any products on the market, which it didn't have by the way, Moderna didn't have any product on the market until the COVID-19 vaccine, and mainstream media said in 2017 they needed a Hail Mary in order to get one onto the market. So that's pretty interesting. But anyway, so that's one reason why Regina Dugan's time at DARPA was interesting, and also a major focus on transhumanist technology. She opened up something called the Transformational Convergence Technologies Office that is now part of the Biological Technologies Office, which does a lot of this transhumanist stuff, brain-machine interfaces and stuff. At Google, while she was running Google's DARPA equivalent, she created digital tattoos to unlock your smartphone, pills you can swallow that turn your whole body into an authentication token for all your smart devices. And a lot of, she basically described her work at Google as fixing the mismatch between humans and machines, technology aimed at bringing humans and machines closer and essentially merging them. She later moves to Facebook and sets up their DARPA equivalent, which used to be called Building 8. While she was there, and that's when she started developing their brain machine interface that is actually a wrist wearable. It doesn't involve any Neuralink brain chips or anything like that. It claims to be able to read your nerve signals before you react or do anything. It basically reads your mind from your wrist. Facebook will allegedly put this on the market in the next 2 years or so. They released a prototype early this year, but she's the person that's behind it. So now she's at Wellcome Leap, calling the shots. So this is a very unfortunate team up, I would argue, and looking at their programs, it's pretty clear. The other person I do want to point out that's on Welcome Leap is Jay Flatley, who is the longtime head of Illumina, which are the company that dominates genetic sequencing, genome sequencing, and their machines have been used all over the world for COVID-19 sequencing and sequencing PCR tests and all of this stuff, and harvesting all this genomic data in the past year and a half. And before then, companies like 23andMe and all this stuff, they use Illumina products. They're the leader in the field. So pretty telling. So anyway, anything you would like to say? I might have a sip of water before getting into the programs.
Yeah, well, one thing that about your article was how it seems like they're the part of it where they're targeting kids, and as
it's
a
mental, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and as a parent, it's like, what the fuck? Leave the kids out of it. Like, even the push to vaccinate, Fauci just recently. I don't know why people are still interviewing him. I don't know why people are still listening to him, but him talking about if you're 2 years or older, if you're not vaccinated, that you should be wearing a mask. He just publicly said this. I mean, it's so ridiculous. And it just boggles my mind that more people, I mean, hopefully it'll be the downfall of, like, getting motivated parents, which nothing motivates you more than protecting your kids.
Yeah.
This issue, hopefully, especially post election, where people don't look at every issue as a political issue, and people could just say, hey, like, this is starting to get completely over the top. You're starting to see the mandating of vaccines to go to universities. You're starting to see mandating of vaccines to go to school, and they're getting rid of religious exemptions. And one thing you see a lot in this kind of medical freedom movement, it's similar to like with the GMO movement back in the day, is a lot of it's motivated moms. You know what I mean? It's people who are not even thinking about themselves, because a lot of times it's like, oh, I'll take a vaccine or whatever, but it's like, wait, my child, like, now I'm concerned because it's harming my child, or it could harm my child. So I'm hoping it kind of works against them in regards to kind of going after the children. But what the fuck is it? Like, why do you think the vaccine thing, do you think they're just trying to basically I know Pfizer recently, they got denied by the FDA in regards to justifying the booster shot. So it's like, wow, even
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah. Wow, that's surprising. Mm-hmm.
It was surprising.
Because Israel's already moved ahead and saying they're going to do the booster every 6 months for indefinitely, basically. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting the U.S. rejected that. I'm sure Pfizer will try again and get it. They might have to move some people around at the FDA. Actually, if you look at the FDA recently, I don't know if you remember the controversy about that Alzheimer's drug, but it led to several resignations on the FDA, the part of the FDA that's responsible for licensing drugs and vaccines. And of course, that happened right before before the anticipated approval, full licensing of the COVID-19 vaccines, which of course right now we're all under emergency use authorization. So fully licensing them or fully licensing them for use in like teens or whatever, despite the lack of the unfortunate risk benefit ratio or lack thereof there, they can just go ahead and license that by putting the right people in those positions that were left vacant by people resigning because of how controversial and poorly handled that Alzheimer's drug case was, right? So
have you seen that Fauci interview with Eugenio the Barris?
I don't watch him because it's infuriating. So when he says something relevant, I'll read like a transcript of it. So I didn't see that one, no.
Well, he's this Latin celebrity, basically.
Oh yeah, the Mexican actor.
Yeah.
And he asked him questions that Fauci wasn't expecting. Yes, I did see that.
Yeah. Well, I actually just saw. I was looking for it because I remember talking to somebody about it, and I'm like, I wonder if I could still find it online. This guy, I mean, he's not Alex Jones. He's not, somebody that you would think would be censored. And it kind of, I mean, I don't know how people don't see through all this nonsense. This guy is just a celebrity who actually asked him some hard questions and basically didn't just take his bullshit answers and just let him say what he wanted, but actually followed up and kind of started highlighting the things that he was saying that didn't make sense. And completely harmless celebrity, so not somebody who has a alternative media history of exposing the elite or whatever, and you can't find this interview anywhere. And I found like some other channel that uploaded it from somewhere else, and but it's the only interview he's done that was difficult. And I found a cut of it where it had him talking before Fauci came on the call, and he was talking in Spanish, and he was saying how he's had a lot of people hit him up about being skeptical of the vaccine. And this guy's a Latin American celebrity. So I started thinking like, okay. And then he's like, and I'm skeptical about it. So I'm really looking forward to kind of talking to him about it, which showed that was his motivation. He really was skeptical. He really was looking for answers. And
well, he asked honest questions. I just think
yeah,
Fauci wasn't used to that, because he's used to,
somebody,
things like CNN or whatever, like very scripted interviews. And this was not that.
somebody on Fauci's team got demoted or fired after that. They're like, well, did you not look into
Yeah,
that?
probably. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Like, it was a great way of kind of sneak attacking him, because even if you looked into this guy who's interviewing you, he's just a Mexican celebrity, a Latin American celebrity. You didn't think like, well, you don't know anything about his personal views, if he was skeptical or not skeptical about what was going on. So it was a great little sneak attack. But for people who say, hey, we're some of this stuff that's being censored is because they're protecting us from medical misinformation or whatever. I mean, that's a perfect example of debunking that whole theory, because this is a honest discussion with some actual questions that from somebody who's skeptical, and he couldn't answer them. And in many cases he got caught in lies, and yet this gets scraped off the face of the earth. I mean, thank God for other platforms like Odyssey, Rockfin, BitChute, and other places where you can find these videos, because I mean, really, this big tech censorship issue is just, I mean, it's how they rewrite history. Because if you end up doing research, and I've talked a lot about this of late, how, if one day our kids are older and they're like, you know what, mom was telling me about what happened in 2020 and all this stuff. Let me just do my own research and see what really happened. What are they going to find? They're going to find mainstream articles, mainstream publications. They're going to find headlines that say that the numbers went down because of the vaccine, and thank God for the vaccine, and it saved lives. And very similar to what we hear about polio and all these other historically diseases that went away because of the vaccine. You can look back now and say, holy shit, like that could be a complete bullshit lie. The numbers could have already been going down. There could already be some type of herd immunity, but yet the newspapers and the history books are saying we're giving the credit to the vaccine, because you're seeing it in real time, and it's happening in real time, where we're seeing people who regurgitate this idea that, oh, the numbers are going down and life's going back to normal because of the vaccine. And I mean, one thing that, and not to get too off track, but I'd love your take on this. I was really just surprised how one day to another, because I live in Massachusetts, and they were opening things up so slowly. It was like a couple more weeks, and then maybe we'll open up to 25%, then a couple more weeks, and we'll open. And then out of nowhere, it seems like, and it wasn't just Massachusetts, it seems like a lot of the states in the US overnight, just like, well, we're going back to normal, go live your life. And it was kind of out of nowhere. Do you have any hunch on why do you think that was? Why there was this quick turnaround where things seemed like they were really milking this, we're in a state of emergency thing, and then all of a sudden it seems like out of nowhere, they, at least in the States, because obviously in the UK where you are, and Brazil and other parts of the world, it's different. But in the US, it seems like out of nowhere, they just gave us our lives back and said, hey, go on. And I was curious if you thought it had anything to do with like the Fauci emails and some of these other things that they could see coming around the corner, that if you kept us distracted and you put us back to work and you let us go back out to eat and go to the bars and get drunk, then nobody's going to be paying attention to all these all this stuff that's being exposed.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think it was also about like narrative control, because like, you had more coverage was being given to the fact that like Florida hadn't done the lockdowns that had been done in other places, and their case numbers were better than places like Michigan that had for such a large amount of time. So I think they were worried about narrative control and the narrative falling apart. And, I think that's why the US moved away from COVID fear porn so much, because they introduced something else that has not yet been introduced in other countries, and that is the domestic terror strategy. Which definitely is a way to clamp down on any sort of thought crime, wrong think online. It focuses a lot on online censorship, but also gives the US government lots of tools to go after people they don't like in ways that are going to be blatantly unconstitutional. If you remember back to the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995, Joe Biden was the person that introduced the omnibus counterterrorism bill of that year that was never passed in the form Biden introduced it in, but it was sort of a watered down version of it that wasn't nearly as awful. Was passed I think in 1996 or 1997. But the version Biden passed was going to allow the president, the sole discretion of the president, at the sole discretion of the president, he could say who's a terrorist and who isn't, without that having to go to court or anything like that. It was going to suspend habeas corpus, which of course was suspended later under the Obama administration when Biden's vice president, and was going to eliminate posse comitatus, so the military could act as law enforcement, and all of that stuff. So, this is an agenda that Biden's been supporting for a very long time, and we're likely to see it again, but I think they need sort of a redux of Oklahoma City to really drive it home, just like the apparatus for DHS and all this other stuff existed the several months before 9/11 happened. They introduced legislation to create DHS under a different name. They were going to call it the National Homeland Security Agency. That was introduced in early 2001. Several months before 9/11. So they set up this infrastructure and these strategies before they actually widely implement them. And we already heard this pivot. So they released the domestic terror strategy, and just recently, the Biden administration has pivoted in their harsh tone to people that oppose the vaccine, or a mandatory vaccination, or the vaccination campaign as it is, saying that they're conservative and that it's extremist to do that. So using the term extremist after the release of this domestic terror strategy pretty much tells you where this is going. And I think it'll manifest in censorship online. And, we're already seeing the door-to-door stuff in the US. It's really only a matter of time until one of the door-to-door people goes on the wrong property and something happens to them and it becomes a nationwide story, and then these door-to-door teams start having security people with guns accompanying them to go to your door or something like that. I could easily see that happening as this unfolds. But the fact that they're trying to label people who oppose mandatory vaccination and whatnot as extremists, they have this domestic terror apparatus, and there's clearly more to come in the war on domestic terror, because January 6th was not enough to manufacture consent for that strategy to be widely implemented, but they're obviously setting it up with the intention to use it. So I think that's what sort of the way they're trying to get around the fact that they I think they decided in the US that the COVID fear porn just wasn't working on enough of the population anymore. And so they decided to move to something else. They know that 9/11 worked really well in the US and the anthrax attacks worked really well. But COVID-19 isn't. So I guess maybe they thought, okay, so the American public, we can control more with fear if they think another person or another group is attacking them and not a disease. So I think they made a shift there, and they haven't done that in other countries in that way. So I don't know. I think actually the UK may be moving in that direction because they're also losing control of the narrative. And so since the Euro finals, which was I think last Sunday, basically they're trying to say that, oh, there's all this racism now because of that, and so we need to censor people's social media. They said on the radio today or yesterday that you shouldn't have a bank account if you're deemed a racist, and all of this stuff, and talking about extremism. Mm-hmm.
I'm a big football fan, and I watched that Italy-England finals, and I know that Saka, who and Rashford, a couple guys
Yeah.
who missed penalty kicks. There's some. I almost thought about it because I know in England there's been some issues with football and some people saying racist things, and I'm like, oh, these poor freaking guys, man. Like some shithead racist is gonna now say something stupid, and they're just gonna maybe it is a big deal. But this is another perfect example. What I was getting to was this is another perfect example of like, okay, maybe there is an issue there, like there is racism in soccer or football, counting on what part of the world you're from, and there is racism there, but like you said, they're going to use this issue for other agendas, and the people who
they already are, though. Like they're calling for government issued IDs to be required to access social media. Since when did a racist incident spur that? Like, if you want to make the same analogy in the US, like with the race issue in American football, like with Colin Kaepernick, how do you say his name? I forget. Sorry,
yeah.
I've only read about it because remember, I haven't lived in the US for a long time, so I don't like watch cable news regularly. Sorry, and I don't follow American football. Sorry. So anyway, there was like a big, a lot of attention paid to that and the taking a knee and the race issue, but there was no, and there were people football fans that pushed back against that and said like racist stuff, whatever. But was the government like, oh, time for government ideas for social media access? Like, no, dude. So obviously the UK government is taking advantage of that. And, the domestic terror strategy in the US is likely to push for this because the US Department of Justice that wrote that strategy and the UK National Crime Agency are both part of something, the World Economic Forum's Partnership Against Cybercrime, which explicitly calls for that to happen. And their report was authored last November. The Biden administration's domestic terror strategy comes out several months later and has similarities in that respect, but numerous similarities, lots of parallels. And it's no coincidence you have the Department of Justice and FBI being members of that, along with parts of Israel's government and part of the UK government, and then Microsoft, Amazon, major banks and stuff are all members of this thing.
Well,
and they did.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say it reminds me of, so you know who Miriam Hanine is? She's been on a couple of Unwanted shows. She's a journalist. She's good friends with Zach Voorhees, the Google whistleblower. She did Vanishing of the Bees documentary. Well, she's in the process of doing a George Floyd documentary, and she's writing a book, and she's going into all these behind the scenes kind of other aspects of the story that people aren't too familiar with. And I think even she wasn't as familiar with certain parts of the story and how deep it is. And she's hit me up because she's like, I can't find anybody to help me with this documentary. Like nobody wants to touch this topic. And it's one of those things where like they've almost made it taboo to even question anything that revolves around racism or transgenders, or like all these topics are like completely off limits in regards to discussing them. And then if you do discuss them, people act like you're insensitive or you're a racist or you're you're insensitive to people who are bisexual or transgender or whatever it may be. And so I'm a big believer of like, you should never self-censor, talk about things honestly. And if, as long as somebody's talking about it honestly, then you shouldn't be attacked for discussing it. And but it's another example of like, okay, if there is more to the George Floyd story, that, and I'm not sure because I haven't I didn't dive deep into it the way she has, but if there is, some of us might never find out because people don't even want to touch the topic because it's so controversial. So it becomes an issue.
Yeah, it happens. And even some of the stuff like I write about, no matter how well documented it is, like for some people, there's some issues that are always going to be like too crazy sounding or too controversial for them to touch. So like I'm talking about like the eugenics stuff, which I know like Corbett does a lot on that too. And it's been just kept coming up so much when I was researching stuff in the past year in relation to like COVID or some stuff going on under the guise of COVID-19 and whatnot. But for some people, it's just too nuts, like, oh, there's no way. Even if you show them that, like, the Rockefellers helped fund the Nazi eugenics program and like all this stuff, and like the history of eugenics in the United States, like how pervasive that ideology was in the early 20th century in the US, and it was bankrolled by the Rockefellers then, and how even there were Supreme Court cases that were supportive of eugenics and the involuntary sterilization of people deemed too stupid to reproduce and stuff. I mean, that happened in the US in the 20s. You can show them the Supreme Court opinions and all this stuff. I mean, people are just like, those people magically disappeared. Even though the Rockefellers, after World War II made the Population Council, or you had Julian Huxley say that we need to make the unthinkable of eugenics thinkable again just a year after World War II ended and stuff. Like, these people did not stop. And it's very easy to show that they, are influential in the fields of medical research, because they've rebranded eugenics as like a medical thing and framed it that way, and have tried to essentially take control of the field of genetics, among other things. The architect of the Human Genome Project, actually, it was the idea of this guy Walter Bodmer in the late 80s. And he was a president of the Eugenics Society. So like, this is like a very pervasive ideology. And then you have it come up with the Epstein scandal in 2019, that Epstein was an avid supporter of eugenics and also transhumanism, and that he funded other scientists like George Church, who's a Harvard geneticist who's been openly accused by mainstream media of supporting eugenicist ideas, or Eric Lander, the top science advisor to Biden, who in 2018 toasted and praised this guy who just a couple years before went on the BBC in the UK and said that people of African descent are genetically inferior to everyone else. And now he's the top science advisor to the woke Biden administration. And the people that criticized and condemned Lander after he did that in 2018 were like, well, it's fine that he's in the Biden administration now because his deputy is going to be an African-American woman, so it's fine. It's fine.
And didn't Margaret Sanger, when she opened up, what was it, like the birth control clinic of America, whatever the hell it was called in New York, she had black employees there too, because she was trying to attract black people there. Or
the Tuskegee experiments.
Yeah.
For example, they had an African-American nurse to make the test subjects feel more at ease and trust them more when they were literally experimenting on them without their consent and causing them extreme harm and suffering by giving them syphilis and not telling them, and also not treating them after a treatment for syphilis became widely available, because they just wanted to see what would happen as the disease progressed. That's some sick mad science. By the way, the person that oversaw that, the Surgeon General at the time, was on the board of trustees of the Population Council, created by the Rockefellers, I think in the 50s. And the top HHS advisor for human rights is a Population Council director. And they were arguing as late as 1968 that there needed to be sterilants put in the water supply of urban communities if not enough people there took birth control voluntarily and stuff.
Well, they did sterilize people all over the US. I mean, that was there's a great documentary, and it was actually Corbett who told me about it. MAFA 21, MAAFA, then a number 21, about the whole history of eugenics in the US, and it's one of the better documentaries on it. And I know there's Robert Kennedy Jr. I didn't get to watch. I watched parts of it. It was called Medical Apartheid. That's a pretty good documentary. I think it gets some of that too. It was on Robert Kennedy Jr.'s website. What is it? children'shealthdefense.com.org or whatever it is. And so, yeah, I mean, this stuff is documented. It sounds crazy, but like you said, like once you realize, like historically, this stuff has happened over and over again, and people just seem to think like, oh, those people existed then, and it's all better now. Now we're, the world's run by moral people. And it's same thing with like the CIA documents, like you have like Operation Mockingbird and all the things that we talk about. And people are always like, yeah, but that happened then. It's like, how do you know it's not happening now? Like a lot of this stuff was declassified afterwards. So people who were living during those times didn't necessarily know.
Yeah, and the CIA was never held accountable for anything bad they've ever done ever. So why would they stop?
Good point.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, without a doubt. But I know I've held you up for a long time. I know you got a little baby, two little babies. You got to, take some time to nurture. So, but for people listening who want to keep up with your work, your articles, all that stuff, can you let them know if they don't know?
Yeah, sure. So if you go to like my Twitter, why it's still there, _, Whitney Webb, you'll see in my Twitter bio, there's a link to a link tree. So if you click on that, it will take you to a link that has literally the links to everything you could possibly need to follow my work, social media accounts and things like that. My backup to Telegram, I don't have to Twitter, I don't have a Facebook, is Telegram right now. So if you're on Telegram, you can search for Unlimited Hangout. We have a channel there where you can follow my work and interviews, whatnot. Probably the best way though to follow my work and not have to rely on a middleman is to sign up for my mailing list by going to my website, unlimitedhangout.com. You can scroll to the bottom, sign up for my mailing list there if you want to support my work and those of the contributors who contribute to my site. You just go out on the top of unlimitedhangout.com. There's a tab that says support us. And you can learn more information about that there. Alternatively, you can subscribe to my to the Unlimited Hangout channel on Rockfin or OKFIN. That is another great way to support the show. And as most people probably know by now, if you sign up for one person's channel on Rockfin, you get access to the premium content of everyone on there. So if you like the other content creators on Rockfin, that may be a good option for you. So, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. And we didn't get to talk much about the Welcome Leap programs. You did mention the one targeting kids, specifically from 3 months to 3 years, in a way that is just insanely awful and is just really criminal, to be honest. So for people that are interested in that, that article is on unlimitedhangout.com, because I also contribute to The Last American Vagabond, so sometimes it can get confusing for people. You can just search for Welcome Leap with 2 L's, welcome with 2 L's, if you would like to learn more about that article.
Yeah, I think I found it on your website, on Unlimited Hangout. But like you said, you contributed to The Last American Vagabond. But that article is on your website. I'll put the links in the show description.
Yeah.
Rockfin's a great way of supporting people, like you said, Whitney. People can sign up if you like Whitney's work. I mean, there's tons of other people on there. We have the UNWANTED now has a channel. I have a channel. A lot of us have a channel on there. It seems like they also helped you out a little bit with some of your past issues, so it made me feel good that they actually cared about the content creators, and they seem like they're
nice guys. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I've actually interviewed Martin on the show. So he's he's an interesting guy, real smart guy, and in regards to like game theory and understanding the whole possibility of creating a system where everybody helps everybody, and everybody benefits from Rockfin. So I like the concept. I like the idea, and so far so good. I don't know of anybody being censored or anything like that. So he's been true to his word in regards to that aspect of it. So
yeah, that's nice, because some other alternative platforms, I know like Rumble and BitChute, have been censoring people on and off. So really that leaves pretty much Rockfin and Odyssey, and I think that's about it.
Well, Float, Aaron.
Oh, right. Okay,
yeah.
I haven't used Float. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Float's pretty cool if people are looking for a Facebook alternative. And they even have a method where you can download. I'm actually surprised Facebook gives you access to all your stuff, but every post you have on Facebook, you can actually download. They'll tell you how to do it. You can download it to your computer, upload it to your Float, and basically abandon your Facebook page and have all that stuff.
Oh, that's nice. I'm going to start telling people that, because I keep telling people to get off Facebook and Twitter, because they specifically say basically in the domestic terror strategy that they're monitoring those platforms, and whatever you say on there can be used against you and can get you labeled a domestic terrorist. And there was actually a case after January 6th of someone who was actually left-wing, oddly enough, basically being indicted for stuff he posted on Facebook but didn't actually do. So that precedent has already been set. That's essentially pre-crime based on social media. So, stop posting on those and move to the alternatives. Not just to feed the big tech beast, but to stop feeding the domestic terror system that they are setting up.
Well, I think a lot of people use it as a cloud, right? You store your pictures of your family and your friends and all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff. So it's like, oh, if I leave Facebook, I'm going to lose all, the archives of my kid growing up and all this stuff. So it was cool that Facebook actually had, or Float actually had a little, it's a couple steps, and they'll tell you exactly how to download every single thing, every video, every post, every picture on from your Facebook, download it and then upload it onto your new Float account. So it's a cool little technique that way you can basically have a free cloud on your Float account of all your stuff, and you can abandon your Facebook page. So the one more incentive, and when you get to meet people like the owners of Float, the creators of Float, Aaron and Kingsley Edwards, and you see that they're actually like really cool people who care about freedoms and rights and stuff like that. I think it's awesome to support people like that. And we're running out of places, so we need to promote other people who are giving us the freedom to have these open discussions and whatnot. So, but thank you, Whitney. I really appreciate your time. Hopefully everything's good in the UK, and good luck.
It's all right. About the same as most other places at this point. So.
Well, well, hopefully things work out there. If not, then I guess the US isn't.
I guess it is. I'll probably be going to the South. I mean, that's where I'm from, and I like the South. Some people don't, but I do. So
Yeah,
we'll see what happens.
yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, I think people are appreciating the slow pace South, where they're like leaving the fuck alone type of attitude. It's
It's always appealed to me, actually. Probably a little too much. Might be why I checked out and went to South America and lived in rural areas of South America for a long time. It was nice.
Yeah, well, I was
But
born in a farm from in Portugal, and my parents are old school farmers, and they like that peaceful kind of quiet lifestyle.
it's
I,
nice.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think the city life is really attractive when you're young and energetic, but you can't live there forever. It's craziness, and you never find peace. You never, or you get detached from other things that are actually important in life. So, without a doubt. But thank you, Whitney. We'll keep in touch, and I'm sure we'll talk again in the near future.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Ricky.
Thanks. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.